Hey guys, welcome to the Crypto Guild. I'm your host Rahul, and on this channel we talk everything crypto. So guys, today's video is going to be about Polkadot. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into it, so I'm going to go into like presentation mode real quick. But what I have done is set up sections or titles across the video. So if you feel like skipping around, feel free to do so if you already know about certain aspects of Polkadot. But it's a super exciting project, and I thought it was time to sort of, go into the architecture, the ecosystem, how it's sort of been coming up. So yeah, let's get started. All right, guys, let's get started. Let's do a deep dive into Polkadot and understand sort of the ecosystem and key aspects of the project. So first up, what is Polkadot? Now, Polkadot's vision, right, is to become the internet of blockchains. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on in this presentation, but they generally subscribe to the principle that no single blockchain can fulfill all the use cases in a secure and efficient manner, right? And it was founded by Dr. Gavin Wood, who is a former Ethereum founder, along with Vitalik Buterin and Charles Hoskinson. Now, Charles, as you guys know, is actually the CEO of Cardano, right? And Gavin also wrote the Solidity smart contract programming language, which is in use in Ethereum today. Next, they use a slight variant of the proof of stake consensus mechanism, and so it's called nominated proof of stake. And just I'll explain it at a really high level, but essentially the the native coin of the Polkadot project is called DOT, D-O-T, right? So here, the validators who participate in the consensus, they will stake their DOT tokens. But in addition to that, you're going to have what we call nominators, or you folks, who are going to also select the validators. And in the end, the stake is a combination of the validator's self-stake and the stake that you have nominated the validator for. And then it sort of goes into the regular proof of stake, choosing mechanism, and then consensus moves forward. Next, Polkadot's actually been under development since 2016, and it went live in May of 2020, right? And as I mentioned before, the native token, or the native coin rather, is the DOT coin. It's used for staking, fees, bonding, and governance. And Parity Technologies and Web3 Foundation are the major contributors to the Polkadot project, and obviously Gavin is closely involved with both organizations. So if I had to sum it up though, I would say that Polkadot is a multi-chain blockchain framework that aims to solve interoperability and scalability using sharding and a plug-and-play architecture. Now, this is quite different from how Cardano or Ethereum are set up, right? So Gavin sort of saw the issues with these other, blockchains, and then decided to come up with an architecture that was, fairly flexible. And in essence, it combines many blockchains into one. And Polkadot would be the framework under which those blockchains fit, right? Next, let's talk a little bit about the technology and ecosystem of Polkadot. So first up, I know this diagram looks a bit complex. You have a relay chain, you have parachains, you have validators, you have collators, you have a bridge, you have a number of different participants. So let's break each one down to try and understand what it really is. So let's start with the core. The core is the relay chain. Now, the relay chain, it's the backbone of Polkadot. It's the communication hub between all the chains, or the parachains, that will connect to the relay chain, and essentially provides the security for the whole network. And the validators, which operate within the relay chain, they accept blocks from every parachain. Next, now what are parachains? Now, parachains are the independent blockchains that will run on the relay chain, right? So the projects are chosen via something called slot auctions. There's a limited number, and I believe the number they're playing around with right now is about 1,000. And you can think of parachains as separate blockchains that connect into this main blockchain called the relay chain, right? And parachains will have, like, for example, stablecoins. You could have one parachain for smart contracts. You could have one parachain as just an Oracle infrastructure. There are many, many possibilities over here, right? And the key thing to note here is that they leverage the security model provided by the relay chain, right? And what's really interesting is each parachain, right, project can sort of plug into this relay chain and can still have its own governance, right? So it's giving a lot of flexibility to the parachain itself. Next, let's talk about parathreads. Now, parathreads are technically like parachains, but not economically, right? Now, what does that mean? Well, that really means is that you can sort of spin up a parathread really quickly, almost instantaneously, and it's for a short period of time. And it's really like almost like a proving ground where you can sort of test out the network. You can run your parachain project, within this overall framework, and see how things go. Now, these are different from the parachains themselves because those will be limited in number, but you can spin up a parathread really, pretty quickly, and you don't have to bond or commit a number of dot tokens or dot coins, sorry, to execute on these. And then finally, you have something called the bridge. Now, a bridge is like a special kind of parachain, and as the name suggests, it acts like a bridge. It connects with other existing blockchains such as Ethereum and Bitcoin, and essentially it's there to transfer tokens between Polkadot and other networks. Now let's talk a little bit about the participants in the consensus mechanism. These are sort of the different chain infrastructures, you could say, that fit into the relay chain, these four boxes we've just been talking about. But now let's talk about the sort of stakeholders. So first up is the validators. So these are the folks whose main goal is to produce blocks and participate in consensus, right? And they perform consensus in the relay chain. Next, you have the nominators. Now, this would be folks such as yourself and myself who will vote for the validators by bonding their dot tokens, and you will get, regular rewards in the form of dot coins. Now, the lockup period, so once you do commit your dot coins to a particular validator, there's a certain lockup period, right, which is 28 days on Polkadot, and it's 7 days on Kusama. We'll talk about Kusama in the next slide, right? But you can think of Kusama as the testnet, if you will, right, for the overall Polkadot ecosystem. Next, you have the fisherman. Now, the fisherman's job is to make sure that there's nothing nefarious going on, right? So they are always sort of checking the validators to make sure that there are no consensus rules being broken. And if they are being broken, then the fishermen report these validators, and then there's a slashing penalty. So that's a penalty where some of the stake of the validator who committed some kind of, nefarious activity is taken away from them. The unfortunate part here is that if you, the nominator, delegated tokens towards a validator who sort of indulge in these nefarious activities, you will also lose your stake, right? So it's like a checks and balance system. And then you have obviously the collators. The collators are the ones who work at the parachain level, right? So in each parachain, you'll have a bunch of collators, and their job is to collect the transactions that are made inside the parachains and produce something called state transition proofs, which are then eventually sent on to the validators to validate. Now, don't get confused by this state transition proofs. Every time a transaction happens on a blockchain, technically you're changing the state of that blockchain, right? So once you change the state, the new state of the blockchain needs to be conveyed, right? And so that's really what state transition proofs are, right? So next up, let's talk a little bit about Kusama, which we mentioned on the previous slide, and the overall governance mechanism of Polkadot, which is worth mentioning because it's pretty unique. And in my mind, it's really a good piece of architecture, right? So first up, Kusama. Now, Kusama, it was founded in 2019 as a canary network for Polkadot. Now, this is really a reference to miners who go in to mine, diamonds or gold or whatever it is in the real world. They used to send in canaries to, make sure that there were no poisonous gases or lack of oxygen. And so the canaries would go in first, and as long as the canaries were chirping, you're good. As soon as they stop chirping, means something's wrong, right? So that's the play over here. Now, Kusama is a substrate-based testing and proving ground, right, for projects that want to sort of work on the Polkadot framework. Substrate is another framework which allows you to quickly configure and deploy blockchains, and it was developed by the Parity Foundation, right? And Parity, again, Dr. Wood is involved with the Parity Foundation along with a bunch of other folks, right? Now, Kusama has nearly the same code base as Polkadot, so it's pretty much emulating what would happen if your project was deployed on the Polkadot sort of, as a parachain or a parathread on the Polkadot framework. And it's really geared towards quick iterations and innovations. So again, testing ground, right, guys? And let's talk a little bit now about the governance mechanism, because I think this is worth calling out in Polkadot. It's pretty unique, and they've taken a very proactive approach towards governance, which is not something that a lot of the other blockchain projects out there, including Cardano or Ethereum, have done, right? They've all got governance as sort of like much later in their roadmap, whereas Polkadot started with governance in mind, right? So they sort of deployed it right off the bat. So the initial governance mechanism was built by Parity Technologies and Web3 Foundation, and then they transitioned it to what we call on-chain governance, which essentially means they sort of enable the governance model so that users, such as yourself and myself, we can essentially start to influence the evolution of the Polkadot blockchain, right? So it involves DOT token holders, it involves validators, a council, and a technical committee. Now, we're not going to get into the guts of what that, of how the governance mechanism actually works, but safe to say they already have a running governance mechanism, which they've actually used already a bunch of times, right? And I think one of the most interesting features of this governance mechanism is that they actually do what we call runtime upgrades. So if there is a change in the governance mechanism at all, of any aspect of Polkadot as voted by the users of Polkadot, that change can be incorporated without doing a hard fork. Right now, a hard fork typically happens when there's a fundamental change in the in the features of the blockchain. So Bitcoin's been hard forked many times, and it usually it usually causes like a lot of angst among people. It sort of spins off different projects. It just leads to a lot of like an unsettled feeling, essentially, right? It's detrimental in general. So Polkadot sort of solved that problem by doing these runtime upgrades that just allow you to change the logic of the chain without the need for a hard fork. So that I thought was definitely worth calling out. Next, let's talk about the core team and development community. So obviously, Dr. Gavin Wood, he's the co-founder of Ethereum, former CTO of the Ethereum Foundation. He's obviously the co-founder of Polkadot, and he's the chairman of Parity Technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, he developed the Solidity programming language. Then you have Robert Habermeyer. He's a Thiel fellow. He's co-founder of Polkadot. His background is in research and development of blockchains, distributed systems, and crypto. And he's a longtime member of the Rust community, the programming language. And then you have Peter, who's a technology entrepreneur. He's the director of the Web3 Foundation. And he has a lot of experience across defense, finance, data analytics, in the mesh networks, distributed knowledge bases, and quant pricing models, right? Now, as far as the development community is concerned, as of early August 2021, they have about 139 contributors in GitHub. Research by a popular sort of newsletter, The Motley Fool, estimates that about 388 people are in the development community of Polkadot as of 2020. So that's a really healthy number, right? And they obviously have contributions from resources from the Web3 Foundation and Parity Technologies as well, who these guys above are all a part of, right? On top of that, I'm going to say that Polkadot appears to be really well funded. They've got a large pool of investors, more than 25, and this includes big names like Block Zero, Boost VC, Block Asset Ventures, Coin Fund, etc. So key takeaway here is solid development community, a lot of people working on it, and obviously they are pretty well funded. Next, let's look at the key milestones in the evolution of this project. So the Polkadot white paper was released in October of 2016, and then a couple of years later, they started implementing a bunch of proof of concepts, and they did that till about January of 2019, and they finally launched the Kusama testnet, right, in August of 2019. And the main relay chain, right, what we spoke about earlier, that was launched in May of 2020, right? And then you had the nominated proof of stake process launch in June of 2020, and then in August they actually did a redenomination of the dot coins, which is the native coins of the Polkadot project, right? And so this redenomination, essentially what it did was Polkadot started off with a fairly low circulating supply. I think it was about, if I'm not mistaken, 10 million. And they did a vote using the on-chain governance, and users voted to 100x that amount. So now there are about a billion dot tokens that will be in circulation. And where we are today is we are currently in the Kusama slot auction. So what is that? So that's basically projects are vying to get into or get a space in Kusama so that they can check out and work with, right, or deploy in a testnet kind of framework, deploy their projects to see, what can be achieved, get used to the system, etc., etc. And that will be followed by the actual Polkadot slot auctions, right? So they're doing this in a pretty deliberate manner, testing first on Kusama, and then if all goes well, move it to like Polkadot slot auctions. So that's kind of where we are, guys, in 2021. So I think this is going to actually have a positive effect on price action, because you're actually going to see projects go live and test out how their features work, right? Followed by the actual live deployment on the on Polkadot. So interesting things coming soon. Now let's talk a little bit about the tokenomics and financials of Polkadot. So Polkadot's done three sort of major financial raises, right? Close to about $250 million, right? The one thing to note here, though, is that of this 250 million, they did have a sort of vulnerability in their multi-signature wallet built by Parity, and they sort of 98 million was frozen of Ethereum was frozen. So even despite that, they have enough funds to keep sort of moving on. From an allocation perspective, about 11.5% was given out as rewards and airdrops. 30% of the allocation is to founders, and about almost 60% is towards investors. And as I said before, the initial supply was actually 10 million, but then there was a vote that was done, and the users voted to 100x that supply. So now there are like a billion, dot coins that were, put as initial supply. Now, the market cap as of August 8th is about 20.2 billion, and you calculate market cap by multiplying the price with the circulating supply. The circulating supply right now is, as of August 8th, is 982 million dot, right? Now, in terms of distribution, you have about 410,000 active accounts on Polkadot, pretty healthy number, and the price is hovering around the $20 mark, and the vesting period really refers to when all the investors, founders, etc., will be able to withdraw their sort of dot tokens. So this goes all the way out to 2026, which is fair. It's a pretty decent vesting schedule, and here you just want to make sure that a lot of the coins aren't released too quickly, because if they are, you have people selling on exchanges that could have a negative impact on price. And the last thing I'll talk about is sort of the inflationary or deflationary aspect of Polkadot. So Polkadot has a sort of dynamic inflation adjustment system. What they're shooting for is a maximum inflation of 10%, right, for a staking supply of 75%. So they're expecting that 75% of the dot coins will be staked, and the inflation will be about 10%. But again, they will dynamically adjust it, and this can even be changed later on using user voting, right? So here's some influencers that will sort of influence the tokenomics of Polkadot, right? So they're not going to have a cap supply, because they need to keep giving out rewards for the validators working on consensus in the main chain, which is the relay chain, right? As I mentioned, they've got a dynamic inflation control mechanism, right? So they want to keep inflation at 10% or less. Vesting schedule, it's fair, 2026. It could be longer, but it's a decent start. Staking and bonding, right? So you basically, staking is when you stake your coins either towards validators to, earn rewards. Bonding is when you have a project that wants to sort of be on the Polkadot framework, right? Or involved in this project. Well, at that point, you have to commit a number of dot coins, and that process is called bonding. And I see the fees will be largely prevalent as the dot network continues to grow. And this is essentially to support interchain communication and transfers, right? And some portion of the transaction and slashing fees, we discussed slashing a few slides ago, where that's really if there's some nefarious activity by some validators, their what they've committed in terms of staking, that stake is going to be like slashed or cut for bad behavior, essentially, right? So some part of this goes to the treasury to help fund development work and related initiatives. All right, guys, next, let's talk about partnerships and adoption. So even though this only went live last year in May, they have a significant number of partnerships. Excuse me, the growing ecosystem of wallets, infrastructure, blockchain explorers, and obviously the substrate based blockchain projects. There's a fair number out there, and they've got a growing user community, over 410,000, and they have about 400 projects going on. So all in all, really good traction since they've come up. And I see this number just continuing to grow because a lot of people are pretty excited about this framework, what it can do. And it's very, thoughtfully done. So from a architecture perspective, I can tell you this is some really good work that Polkadot has done. Last, let's just talk about some key takeaways. So as I mentioned before, it's a pretty unique multi-chain framework designed to address scalability and interoperability challenges which are inherent in blockchain projects, right? You see a number of blockchain projects struggling with this, right? They've got strong and growing partnerships and community adoption since its release in May 2020. They are well-funded, solid leadership, and they've got an experienced team to help build out the Polka ecosystem. Strong on-chain governance, and they're hedged against hard forks, which to me is a very big deal. And they got fairly strong tokenomics, and they're generally well positioned for the future, right? Now, I say well positioned for the future, but obviously there is competition, right? You have the likes of Ethereum, Cardano, Tezos, Near Protocol, Definity, Avalanche, all vying for a place in this already crowded space. But that said, again, this is, it's a very unique approach, and I do think Polkadot has legs. It's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds, but it definitely has legs. So that's it for today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And you tell me what you think of Polkadot. Do you think it holds water? Do you think it's going to do well in the future? I'd be really curious to know what the community is thinking at large. All right, guys, thank you so much. And until next time, peace.